Greetings and welcome to the channel. As you remember last time, if you watched the video, we were talking about the authority under new management, and that was where Warren Ellis and Brian Hitch handed over the reins to Mark Millar and Frank Quietly. Now, I talked about the subtlety in storytelling in the original Warren Ellis and Brian Hitch part of that trade paperback, and how the direction changed somewhat under Mark Millar. And I am a huge fan of Mark Millar's work. I really have loved his run on the authority. Is just absolutely brilliant. I really enjoy Nemesis. I know that Nemesis gets a lot of stick, but for what it is supposed to be, he does a really good job and he nails it for the most part. The way that he tells stories, I know a lot of people have issues, but one of the things that I really enjoy about his work is he frames his stories really well. They're often very, very interesting concepts that he builds up, and he gets the characterization right for the characters that he's trying to tell. And most of the time, his characters are not straight up superheroes, but he likes to ground them. And whereas that would have been considered in the 1980s of giving them feet of clay, in much the way that Frank Millar and other deconstructive forces in the comics industry worked, Mark Millar is more realist in his approach. And it's just something that really resonated with me as a storyteller. I prefer the idea that you're real and authentic rather than these godlike, moral, completely moral people. There aren't people like that. There's no one that's really moral. The reason we act the way we do is because of upbringing, because of choices, because of opportunity. And he really nails all of that down. And I think this is one of those books that, if it had been written 10 years ago, it would be brilliant. But as it stands, having read this book, I can only feel that Netflix, who he's working with, has had a huge impact on his work, and not for the better. Let me just open it up and I'll show you what I mean. So, obviously, created by Mark Millar at Netflix is not the stamp of quality that I would be looking for in a book. But, teaming with Netflix is a good strategy. They've got money. You don't need to worry about financing. You can get the best talent to work with you. You've got the full weight of their marketing and PR machine at your disposal. It's in their best interest that you churn out the best work. So I can imagine that they give him a lot of leeway. The problem is that these people are not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're not doing it to further comic books. They're doing it to find new properties to adapt. And I can imagine that there's a great deal of pressure coming from the Netflix executives onto the comic branch to create stuff that works well in the format that Netflix likes to work in. One of the main issues that I have with that is that most of the problems that are come from happening in the comic industry now are caused by this desire to turn comics into a proving grounds for concepts for streaming platforms. And I mean, Netflix are doing this with Mark Millar. They're wearing this on their sleeves and they're saying, look, we can do this and we can get a good product. And I think this is a good example of what I'm talking about. So this is a good product. I mean, look at this artwork. I mean, Frank Quietly, you can say he's an acquired taste, but I would say that if you don't like his work, you're an idiot. I think his work's brilliant. It's intricate, it's detailed, it fits perfectly within the medium of comics, and he knows and understands comics and the medium so well. He comes at it from an intellectual point of view. His construction of panels, the way that he does things, it's just I would say it's sublime, but you know, that's me, and I can understand the criticism he gets too. So, you know, I'm not taking anything away from anyone's personal choices, but yeah, he's great. And if you don't think so, that's fine. I wouldn't trust you, but there you go. So we got this kind of creature that's arrived. He's obviously got some kind of abilities, and you know, he likes to have this absurd. Mark Millar likes to have this absurd kind of characterization. You know, you're in the dark, you don't know what's going on. He just likes to throw you in cold. And here we go. He's being disturbed. Look at this, it's so beautiful, so intricate. You know, panels like this are hard to draw. You know, they take time. It's deceptively difficult. It looks so easy, makes it look so easy, but you know, it's so weighted, and I'd love to see the script on this to see what was actually being said, the directions for the artist, but he knocked it out of the park. I mean, this is just brilliant. We immediately get the contrast in the scene that makes it interesting to look at. You get a sense that, you know, the wondrous and the powerful forces at play. You know, it all aids to suck you into the story. And then we get the usual shadowy figure, you know, comes out of nowhere, and it's all kind of cryptic. We get a good look at the creature's face, and then we get some more backstory. You know, targeting system tells us a little bit about this character. He's a special agent, works for the Department of Extra-Normal Operations. There's a lot going on there. Then we wind that scene up, and then we transition to this. Now, this one kind of confused me a little bit, but you know, I felt like we were traveling around. But this is Mark Millar, and this is the sort of cold opening that you get on a Netflix show. So when I read this, you know, the contrast between this and this, immediately, it kind of, I don't know, it kind of triggered something in my spider sense started ringing. I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was, but it was that. I think it was that. It's like, this is a cold opening for a Netflix show, and that's how it felt. But it also has hallmarks of Millar's style, so it's hard to say that he's selling out or anything. And that was my concern about this book. Is this just another pitch for a Netflix show? Or is it going to be, you know, a superhero comic book that we're kind of expecting? So this guy, he's looking for something they've seen. They crash, and then suddenly they wake up. And they're on their way home. You know, they've had their minds erased, Men in Black style. Then we get to see more of the history world. Now, this is another thing I loved about The Authority, alternate history of the world type stuff. It's really good fun for me, and it's a great concept. And I think here Millar's playing with his Jupiter's Legacy character. This looks like the Utopian, and this Operation Blue Sky is United States plan to pretend that they'd won the superhuman space race, or as it were, superhuman weapons race, by forging the existence of a superhero. And obviously here we see what looks like the character from the first few pages. So clearly they're referencing the part of their world history here. They must have succeeded with that, but you know, he then goes on to tell us that the Bonzo program was mothballed. And yeah, the ominous darkness, you know, the cynical nature of the world's governments and the way that they operate. You know, it's Mark Millar particular brand of storytelling. He likes to use that dark forces, sinister forces trope. Now, the end of this panel was where this page of dialogue that's really frustrating. I'm going to read a little bit. Is this a joke? One of the generals is saying. And the presenter's saying, unfortunately not. We understand the experiments have been happening in a secret Antarctic city and are financed by a billionaire we're trying to identify. What he's talking about here is that they've discovered that somebody's building superheroes for real. And the general immediately says, surely this is excellent news. Can't we just bring them into the fold and co-opt his technology? This guy's done us a favor. He's bringing America's defense program to the 21st century. Well, first of all, he is a she, sir. And secondly, she is an American. Now, the narrative dialogue on this page just made me cringe. My eyes rolled back into my head, and I can't help but feel that way because this page is so clearly structured to kind of create that, oh, what? You assumed his identity? We're seeing this modern trope sliding into everything, this gender ideology. It's poisonous. And when I read this, I just immediately started to like really lose hope on this series. And having read the series so far, I kind of feel that I was justified in feeling that way. But the truth is, this book is a lot more complicated than that. And it's not so simple to just simply say, you know, he's gone woke or whatever that people would say about something like this. I don't personally hold with that concept of wokeness. This is, you know, a story designed as a blueprint for a Netflix show. That's pure and simple. And modern storytelling likes to shock and play with gender and gender roles and gender ideology. It's just a part of the modern day entertainment industry. The problem that I have with it is it's not reality. It's not the reality that most people deal with on a day-to-day basis. It's not the way that we kind of relate to the world. You know, most of us understand how biology matters, and you know, we make distinctions and judgments all day. And you know, those days of, oh, Dr. Phillips, I expected a man, you know, when you go for your doctor's appointment, they're gone. Most people won't bat an eyelid about the idea that a doctor could be a man now or a woman now. And it's just kind of, it's kind of a false trope. And when we're talking about like when a regular normal guy is talking about people being he, it's not meant in that way. There's no need for the correction. You just simply provide the missing information that this woman is a she, and now we move on in conversation. So that's why that last transition kind of frustrated me somewhat. And then we get this switch. So the person making superheroes in the Antarctic is a Korean woman, and she is giving a presentation out. Interestingly, she's in jail for fraud, which is kind of a bit of a nod to the recent troubles that some of the Samsung executives have had in recent years of, you know, committing fraud. I can't remember the Prime Minister's name, you know, being implicated and being a huge scandal. But yeah, he likes to wrap in some of the real world issues. And so basically we have a new superhuman who is offering the chance to win the golden ticket and become a superhero. And this is a really interesting concept. And this is where I've started to feel that my faith is, you know, being restored. We were actually seeing a really cool concept being laid out. It's like your fantasy as a comic book reader is to have superpowers, to be like Superman, to have the ability to climb walls like Spider-Man, and you know, these are all things, but it's all wrapped up in this beautifully dark and mysterious and dangerous world that Mark Millar likes to create for most of his stories. But the problem I had with this is, again, it's all very contrived. I mean, it wouldn't have been, it would have been enough for me had this superheroic Doctor just provided it, and we could have gone and explored all of this stuff later in history. But I guess that's not where he wanted to take this story. So instead we get this tale of woe about the Doctor was designing the superheroes, and her husband stole her ideas and had her put in jail for fraud for 80 years. And again, this is where I can't help but feel that maybe Netflix has had some influence on the story here, because it just seems that in order to show a female in modern culture succeed, there has to be a villainous man. And you can't get much more villainous than an ex-husband who has wronged his wife. And, you know, she's rising above it all, literally, by flying above the crowd and announcing that she's giving away superpowers. And obviously she's downloaded her spirit into this physical superpowered being, whilst her other body is in jail and is forced to commit suicide. And basically, yeah, we're treated to this. Now, you know, this is Mark Millar. This is how he tells stories. He's a shock jock. You know, if he was a radio, he'd be Howard. If he was a radio DJ, he'd be Howard Stern. He's that kind of guy. But this stuff is shocking for the sake of being shocking, and I don't really feel that it adds a great deal. In fact, it detracts from the concept that he's setting up. You know, this is something that I really do struggle with, because comic books are such an excellent medium for telling really intricate stories, but this is an intricate story that's been told in such a way as to just maximize shock value and minimize, and it minimizes the awesome plot. I don't know what you call it. The awesome concept of the story itself is that, you know, you get anyone in the world can enter this contest and get superpowers. And it's already tainted, and it feels dirty. And I think that's kind of the problem I had with the series. This tone that it sets early on of blood and guts and death just sits in stark contrast to what she's saying. It makes me not trust this character, and it makes me think that she's acting in bad faith. And so even though she's saying she's good, she's lamenting her relationship with her former husband. You know, I have to ask myself, it's like, if the husband is such an evil, terrible person, is she not evil and terrible and they've just had a disagreement? It kind of suggests that she's not a good person too. And then the response to the United States here is, you know, the president of the United States is watching all of this unfolding on television, and he's terrified by the idea that nice people will get superpowers. And I mean, it just feels like we're being made to think a certain way. And Mark Millar, you know, often presented his concepts and his stories in such a way that you were free to have your own opinion about these things. But now it doesn't feel that way. It feels like we're supposed to feel sorry for her. We're supposed to see her as a benevolent benefactor who's dishing out superpowers like Willy Wonka to the nicest people she can find. And we're also meant to believe that the president of the United States, of the country with, you know, a huge chance of gaining superhumans working for it, is suddenly, oh, this is terrifying. I don't know. If 10 years ago you'd written this story, it would have been different. That's kind of what I'm saying, is this story would have been different. You know, we are getting pushed into accepting concepts that we're just not 100% comfortable with. And this comic book just has that about it. And, you know, yeah. And as well as that, it feels like a really wasted opportunity to see Frank Quietly doing what Frank Quietly does best. This is where it gets interesting. You know, we are then taken to Soweto, South Africa, this globe hopping storyline. Some absolutely beautifully rendered art here. You know, Frank Quietly's art is just, I just love it. I just love looking at it. It's so clean, it's so nice. And he's doing the colouring on this book as well. And here we go. You know, we get to see what we paid to see. You know, this is what we wanted to see. We wanted to see Frank Quietly telling a stylized action sequence, doing what he does best. And yeah, and I feel like this is kind of, for me, the part that would have got me interested, because this is what we like to see. I can't see the script. He likes to do these things, so I'm going to read this script. I didn't read this part, I only read the story. And yeah, I'll be looking at the scripts. And I love these making ofs, they're absolutely fantastic. I'll be reading this later. And yeah, so this is a great book. I mean, don't get me wrong, the things I said about the issues I've had with this story, it's not really per se this particular type of story. I just feel that we are, as a writer, that he is trying to show us his story. He's trying to tell us his story, and he's setting up the stakes. He's setting up the conflict, and yeah, that's totally fine. But the one thing I would say is that this feels remarkably contrived, and even having it be South Korean, just again, it speaks to the Netflix style. I mean, I get the feeling that they are keen to do another kind of globe-trotting science fiction superhero genre. They didn't hit the mark with their adaptation of Jupiter's Legacy, and I think the reason they didn't hit the mark with it is because they tried to take a loose adaptation with the actual original story. The comic book, for me, had problems, but it was pretty solid comic book, and it could have warranted having a direct port across the medium, and it could have just been scene for scene, and it would have worked perfectly, and it would have had everything that Netflix needed to make it a success. But they wanted to do what they wanted to do, and they wanted to turn it into a female-led TV show. And they wanted the daughter to be the main character, and for her to have her independence. And the problem with that is that wasn't the story. She was a screw-up in the books, and she was supposed to be, you know, the Paris Hilton type, because that's when the story was conceived, is back in those days. So now, in order to make it for the modern audiences, they had to show that she was strong and independent and didn't need a man to complete her, that she wanted a man. And I think it failed for these little subtleties. And she had daddy issues with the Utopian, and they focused on it, and then they abandoned all that setup and then went back to the Great Depression era. The whole thing kind of lumbered along, but I actually enjoyed the Netflix series. I actually thought it was quite good, and if it hadn't been a Jupiter's Legacy adaptation, I would have really enjoyed it. And this is where I feel that the partnership between Netflix and Millar is going to come unstuck, because they're going to want to take his adaptations down a certain road, and I think he's preempting that in his writing with this particular book. And so yeah, it's very hard to have a positive expectation about this book. I mean, you should bear in mind that this is the only book that Mark Millar and Frank Quietly actually worked together on. The next books, I think, are different creative teams, which makes for a little bit of a disjointed read throughout the series. But I am not taking anything away, because the talent that he's able to bring on board with this partnership is just absolutely fantastic. So the artwork is still brilliant. I'll be looking at the issues and going over them. I don't want to consider it a review, because I'm not really a review. I'm kind of more of a a critic, a cultural critic, than a reviewer. So I would recommend, but in the reviewing capacity, I would say this is a good book. Please go out and buy it because it's worth having in your collection. It's worth reading. So yeah, The Ambassadors, issue 1, Willy Wonka with superpowers. If that sounds interesting to you, then I think you should give it a go. But if you're expecting him to book the trend of the Netflix adaptation outline, then I think you're going to be disappointed, because there is some Mark Millar brilliance in there, and there's some wonderful artwork by Frank Quietly, but for the most part, it's a bit tropey. Ropey, shall we say. Anyway, thanks for listening, and like and subscribe if you like the content. If not, thank you for watching. Cheers.